Hi weaving friends, today I'm very excited to introduce you to my new Countermarch loom. Today's video is brought to you by the Online Weaving School with classes and memberships for all kinds of weaving, all kinds of levels. There's something for everyone. I'll leave the link down below so that you can go and check it out for yourself. I did say my new loom, but what I should say is it's my new to me loom because it is a secondhand loom. I'm going to kind of introduce you to the loom, tell you a little bit about it, how I came to have it in my possession, and just show you over it a little bit in case you have no familiarity with this type of loom at all. Just as a disclaimer, this is not a tutorial, this is going to be a chatty, vloggy type of video, so if that is not your thing, that's absolutely fine. Just giving you some fair warning so that you can find the type of video that suits you. So I was looking for a large floor loom for quite some time, probably ever since we moved here and I got my own studio, and I was a bit apprehensive about the size of a loom and how it was going to fit into my studio, especially considering the billiard table is still in the studio and seems that it's going to stay at least for the near future. I have made use of the billiard table by putting covers on it so that I can use it as a cutting table and that sort of thing. But that was a very big consideration for the size, for the space that I had. I was very pleased once we had the loom assembled to find that the space around it was actually greater than I thought it was going to be, than I had measured for, so that was a real bonus. So initially I was looking for a Glimacra 8 shaft to 10 shaft. I wanted at least 150 centimeters weaving width. The width was one of the most important things to me because I really want to weave larger things like blankets on the loom, and my current floor loom only has a 90 centimeter weaving width. I'm going to try in this video to not compare this loom constantly with my other floor loom, which is a Louet David. I think I'll do a comparison in a later video perhaps, because there are a lot of differences between the two and there are definitely pros and cons with both. If you would be interested in a comparison video just as like a modern floor loom as compared to an older floor loom, let me know in the comments below. And enough people are interested, I'll definitely do that video. But I do want to sort of focus on this one today. In my mind, I keep comparing it to the David, but I want to just talk about this one and its own specifics today. Anyway, so the story of how I came to have this loom. I found a lovely lady on Facebook who was selling this loom. As I said, I was looking for a Glimacra and I sort of had my heart set on that because it seemed to have everything that I wanted. But if I'd known sooner that a lot of the Countermarch looms are very similar, then I probably wouldn't have been so specific about wanting a Glimacra. So this loom was made in Finland by Varpapju. They no longer exist as a company. It was probably made around the 1980s, maybe the late 70s. And it's kind of hard to get information on them because the company doesn't exist anymore. The actual specific name of the loom, and I'm probably going to mispronounce it, so if you know the correct pronunciation, can you please let me know in the comments below? It is a Varpapju Berja Savonia. I'm not sure if the G in Berja is pronounced or if it's meant to be Beria or something like that. I'm sure someone could let me know. It has 10 shafts and 10 treadles, which is great, and it's 150 centimeters of weaving width. The only problem with the loom was that it was on the Sunshine Coast of Australia in Queensland, and I'm way down the bottom of Australia, not as far as Tasmania, but I'm in the state of Victoria, and I'm right down the bottom of the state of Victoria. So that presented with some possible problems, but Kerry, the lady that I bought the loom from, was so fantastic, and I had spoken to a couple of other people prior to looking at this loom who were also in other locations who weren't really willing to work with me on the logistics of getting the loom to me. Kerry was absolutely fantastic. She organised a removalist to come to her house and then to bring it to a drop-off point in my state that I could drive to. She packed it up really beautifully with heaps of bubble wrap. It was really well packed and taken apart. So on the day of the pickup, my husband and I hooked up the trailer to our van and we drove to the pickup point. The removalists were already there waiting for us, which was great. Only thing was, it was a very cold winter's day and it was starting to rain just as we got there. And as we started to pack the pieces into the trailer, my husband said, "Oh, I've left the tarp at home, the tarpaulin, the cover for the trailer." So the waterproof cover that we had for the trailer was not with us. We'd left early in the morning in kind of a hurry. So that was a little bit of a bummer because I was a bit worried about the loom getting wet because it was starting to rain. Anyway, the guys who delivered it for us packed it into the trailer really fast. They were wonderful. And we zoomed off to the nearest hardware store and bought a big tarp and covered it all up. When we got home and I unwrapped all the pieces to check if anything was wet, the bubble wrap on the outside of the pieces was wet in places, but none of the wood was wet. Thank goodness, it was all fine. So then our next challenge was to start putting the loom together. And thankfully my husband is really good at doing that sort of thing and really enjoys the challenge as well. And also he happens to be my #1 fan. So anything that helps me to do more weaving, he's right into it and my biggest support person. So we started putting it together and it took quite a number of days to put it together. Also, we didn't have the best instructions, so it was a little bit tricky at times, but getting the frame together was okay. When it got really tricky was actually setting up all of the cords and the pieces and everything. Before the loom arrived, the previous owner, Kerry, recommended this book to me. I purchased this and it arrived from overseas. It was very expensive, but it was worthwhile to have this book. This really helped. So that's one good thing about this type of loom is even though the company is out of business, it does have so many similarities to a Glimacra and they have great information on putting looms together, using them and all that kind of thing. So that really helped between this and the Glimacra website. That was really helpful. And then of course, the third thing was I was constantly messaging Kerry and she helped me out a great deal by sending me photos and information for what I needed to do. At the end of setting up the loom, I was actually really pleased to discover that this setup is not nearly as complicated as I thought it was going to be. Once I knew how to set things up, they all made sense. And the way that the loom works makes sense to me now. I still have quite a lot of fine tuning to do, but it's very minor stuff. So it's all working really well. And a lot of the work is actually in the setup. So tying up all the cords to the jacks and the lambs and the shafts, tying up the treadles. Actually, tying up the treadles was one of the last things that I started doing before I started weaving this piece, and it took me a couple of days because the treadles are way more difficult to tie up than I'm used to. I'm used to my sinking shed tie up where you just attach the shafts to each treadle that you want. But with this loom, the shafts go up and the shafts go down. And so you need to attach the shafts that go up and you need to attach the shafts that go down separately. And it's quite tricky the way that the treadles are set up to get underneath them and to put the pins in and everything that you need to tie the treadles up. That was really hard on my back. Even though you can get inside the loom, I was on the floor for quite some time. And I do need to adjust my treadles to make them just a little bit lower, but I haven't done it yet because I don't want to get back on the floor. Thankfully, I'm going to be using this for overshot a lot. That's really what I want to weave so much on this loom. And so I won't be needing to change the tie up a whole lot. I wanted to give you an idea of the space that is around the loom, just to give you a little bit of perspective of the size. It's really hard to do in a kind of studio space, which is basically a large room. Just to get the camera at the right angles, you know, I'm limited with the focal length and that sort of thing. So I thought if I just stood over the far side of the loom, I'll walk around the front and around the side, and then I'll take the camera around the back just to show you the space. So when I push this bench seat in. The bench seat came with the loom, which is great, and it's height adjustable. When I push that in, I have a good bit of clear space between the loom here and a work table here. The work table's got my table loom on it, and it's where I work on my laptop quite a bit and have a heap of other stuff that I do there. So that was one concern, that I'd have enough space between the loom and the table so that I could come in front of the loom, that I could pull the bench out and sit down, that I could do the warping, and that I could still pull this chair out from the table to sit down there, because I hate squashy confined spaces where you're just poking in and out of everything. But this has worked out beautifully. So I have plenty of space to walk through right here. And then another concern was the side of the loom. I wanted to, of course, have enough room to do the adjustments with the warp here at the front and the back, because the billiard table is right here and I can't move it at all. There is actually space for it to go towards the windows a bit more, but it's too heavy to move. You'd need equipment to actually move it, which is a bit of a bummer. But I also wanted to have enough space so that if anyone wanted to play pool, they could still play it without knocking into the loom. So it's not ideal for playing pool now, because the space is kind of limited between the table and the loom, but you can still get around it. You just have to be careful. And honestly, people don't play pool in here enough for me to make that a huge consideration. So I'll pop around the back and show you the space there. Okay, so this is the side space that I was just referring to between the pool table and the loom here. And then around the back, I've got all of this space right here, because another concern was that it was going to be not enough space between my David floor loom, which is here, and the back of the new loom. But as it turns out, at the back here, I have a ton of space. I can even swing around in it, and it's all good. So that is really great. I have so much room for doing stuff at the back of the loom here. And then I've got so much room for sitting at the other floor loom. I'm just going to start at the front and give you a bit of an overview of all of the parts of the loom. Also, if you are really interested in this type of loom, perhaps you've acquired one recently yourself, I want to recommend another YouTube channel. It's Claire Hoskin, and she has a series of videos of this exact loom from a couple of years ago. She's got a few subtle differences to mine, but basically it's the same loom. And she takes you over all the parts and everything in fairly good detail. So I watched those before my loom arrived, and I found that really helpful just to know where everything should be and how they worked. I'll leave a link to her channel down below. So at the front here, as I said, the bench came with the loom. I've got nice big breast beam here that slots out when I'm not using it. So when I'm threading up the loom or whatever, I can take that out. The beater is overhung, and I absolutely love this beater. It's one of the main things that I love about the loom, and it's one thing in particular that I was really looking for in a floor loom. I just love the weight of it. It's very heavy, but it swings so beautifully. And I love the mechanics of it because it's just sitting, pieces sitting. It's not even attached. Like, I could lift this up and off right now, but because of the weight and how it's designed, it just sits and rocks in the ridges, and it's all adjustable. The height's adjustable. I can put it further back. I can put it further forward. It's just great. I love it. And I just really enjoy weaving with a beater that has a bit of weight about it, but is really smooth at the same time. Up the top here are all of the jacks, and I kind of think of these as like the control center. And it sort of looks like, you know, if you imagine a marionette on strings, it's controlling things, but different things at different times from different directions. But it's really not that complicated. So we've got some strings that come out and connect to the shafts. And then we've got the Y string in the middle that goes straight down to the lower lambs, which I'll show you in a minute. And when I press on a treadle, which you should see on the screen right now, the jacks move and they control the shafts and those lower lambs as well. Speaking of how easy it is to adjust the tension, you do have to get up from the loom and come around to the side to do it, which actually suits me pretty well. My other loom does have a friction brake, so you don't have to get up, and that has its benefits too because you can get in this real weave flow. But I actually like getting up and advancing the warp because it just gives me an opportunity to stretch a little bit, move around in a different position, because I can tend to be in one position for too long if I get in the weaving zone, and then I'm sore when I get up. So I don't mind hopping up to come around here. And I really like the simplicity of the brake system on this loom. It's not complicated at all. And I appreciate that non-fussiness of design. I don't have to mess around with anything. It's so straightforward. You just release a little bit and then you pull a little bit. And I really like these big wheels. Maybe it's because we recently watched Horatio Hornblower series, but I always feel like I'm a captain at a wheel doing something really important, tightening this up every time I use it. The treadles for me, they're going to take a bit of getting used to. They're not like treadles I've used before. These treadles, at the moment, I'm using 6 treadles, and yes, they do look a bit of a mess. As I said, I still have some adjusting to do with the height, and I need to, for example, find out why this tabby treadle right here on this side wants to be in with its buddies, but on this side, it's happy to stay separate. I'd really rather that it was separate rather than leaning in. I'm not sure why that is. These are the things that I need to fine tune and learn why certain things are doing undesirable things. And so I would like to have these treadles a little bit lower, probably about level with the footrest. That's what Kerry told me she does. And I'm also not used to pressing on a treadle and having other treadles come up, because obviously that doesn't happen on my other loom. And these treadles are also hinged in a different way so that it takes a little bit more effort to treadle them. And also they're much closer together than the treadles that I'm used to. Obviously it's much easier to treadle. If there are gaps between the treadles, it's easier to find where you are and which one you should be pressing down. These are things that I'm quite sure I will get used to. I've only been weaving on this loom over the past week, so I haven't had a heap of time to understand it all. I did make a mistake when I was tying on my warp. I brought the apron rod up and over the breast beam, as you should, and as I normally do on my other loom, not realizing that I was supposed to make it go up and over this support beam first. So instead of angling straight towards the breast beam, this apron rod should have gone underneath here, over the top, and then underneath and over the top of the breast beam. So making this mistake once is enough for me because it's an annoying mistake to make. What happens is when I sit at the loom, instead of having this apron rod up higher and clearing over this support beam, it's resting on my legs. That is really not a very comfortable way to weave. So I definitely won't be making that mistake again. This was just something that I didn't realize I was supposed to do. As far as warping this loom for the first time, it did actually come with a sectional beam, but I don't have a tension box or anything that I can use in order to use a sectional beam, which you really do need for a sectional beam. So I do intend to use that in the future, especially when I put on some really wide projects, but I need to buy further equipment in order to use that. So that's just stored away for now. What I did instead is my wonderful husband made me a really long rattle that fits on top right here. And so I just made my warp on my warping board. I put it through the rattle and it worked out beautifully. Honestly, I was wondering, how different or how difficult it was going to be to warp such a large loom when I'm used to warping a much, much smaller one. And I actually found the warping process very quick and easy. It was really great to warp, and the rattle that my husband made worked out perfectly. Even if I don't get the equipment that I need for the sectional beam for some time, I'm not really worried because this all went so well that I feel confident to try even some wider warps. Something that's been quite novel for me having used a smaller floor loom for many years, is being able to actually get inside the loom and get really close to the things that you're setting up. I found that really useful in the setup process, especially once you know where all of the beams are, because I did hit my head a couple of times. You have to be a little bit careful about that. But that goes for the front of the loom as well. Once you take off the beater and the breast beam, you can get in so close to these shafts for threading. That's something that is really, really awesome for me, because I get so sore sitting there threading. And I feel like that was really reduced with my first warp on this loom. Now, as I said, the tying up the treadles is not fun. I only had 6 treadles to tie up, and it did take me quite a long time. It's just trying to lift up the treadles and get underneath to put the pins in is the difficult part. I know that some people have devised other methods for countermarch looms on how to simplify the tie-up so it doesn't take as long and it's not as backbreaking. I would like to look into those methods, but because I'm still learning, at this point, I wanted to just keep things simple. This loom also came with a flying shuttle, which I haven't actually set up yet. So it's basically a big long box that goes on the front of the beater, and then you have a weighted shuttle that flies through the middle, and it's hooked up to some strings up here, and you can yank on the cord to make the shuttle fly through. The idea of that is when you have a really wide warp, you can imagine if I had this fully warped, if I'm trying to reach way over here with my shuttle and catch it way over here, it's going to be really difficult and probably not very good for my back to be going back and forth like that either. So when I set up a wide warp eventually, I will also set up that flying shuttle and make use of that. I've heard that that's a little bit of a learning curve too if you're used to just using a boat shuttle, but I'm looking forward to trying it. I know that someone's going to ask me about the beautiful piece that I have on the loom. This is an overshot design. It's called Lee's Surrender. It's a very old overshot draft. And I got my draft from Marguerite Porter Davison's Handweaver's Pattern book, but it's only in the green book. I did check my orange book as well, which is a reprint of this one, and unfortunately it wasn't in there. So if you've got the green book, as I am very blessed to have, thanks to one of my students who kindly gifted it to me, you will find it in there. It is on page 184, and it is a really gorgeous design. I've actually always wanted to weave this design, and so I thought that my first project on the loom, I wanted it to not be too wide, but I did want it to be special. What I've used for my warp is just an 8-2 cotton. It's just a slightly off-white cotton. I do have a 12 dent reed, and I'm weaving it at a set of 24. And then for my weft, for my pattern weft, I've used a blue fingering, well, it's a dark blue navy fingering weight merino wool that came from Bendigo Wool and Mills. I can include the links to these specific yarns in the comments down below. This Lee's Surrender does have rather a long threading repeat. It's all just one threading repeat that is 480 ends, but that makes sense once you look at the pattern because it's got different areas for the borders and the central panel and all of that. So it's going really well and I can't wait to get it off the loom. Someone asked me what I'm going to do with the piece and I said I hadn't even thought about that. I just wanted to put it on as my first piece on this loom. It may become a wall hanging. I certainly need some more wall hangings out in the studio, I think. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this overview of my new loom. If you have any questions, because I'm sure that I have missed stuff that's important, you can pop them in the comments down below. And remember, if you want me to do that comparison video, let me know in the comments as well. And until next time, happy weaving!